All right, guys, so we left off talking about acid rain and discussing the ideas of the main acids are going to be sulfuric and nitric acid. And if you didn't get this at the end of class yesterday, remember your formula for sulfuric acid is H2SO4, and your formula for nitric acid is HNO3. The main sources of these, sulfuric acid, tends to come from the burning of fossil fuels, specifically coal. And then we have the nitric acid, which primarily comes from vehicle emissions. Okay, so moving on. Now, today we're going to talk about, finish up our general kind of conceptual ideas about ecosystem ecology with some discussion on climate and wind patterns. And then we will move on and look at aquatic biomes and structures of lakes and ocean communities with a little bit more focus on the biology of them, kind of incorporating the biology along with the geology that we've been discussing. So with regards to climate, your main abiotic factors are the ones we've been discussing, right? Temperature, precipitation, wind, and light. And by far, the two most important in terms of determining climate, along with the plant community, are going to be, first of all, temperature, and then second of all, precipitation. Okay, the other factors are important, but not nearly to the extent that temperature and precipitation are. A little bit on atmospheric circulation. Okay, now what we're going to see is differences in temperature due to variations in how much sun hits the Earth at different latitudes. Okay, we all know that at the equator it's really warm, and up towards the poles it's much colder. Well, here's the reason why, guys. Look at the curvature of the Earth and look at the sun's rays at the equator. Okay, it's traveling a much shorter distance once it enters into the atmosphere compared to up here at the North Pole, for example. Also, those sun's rays have to travel over a much larger surface area up here at the North Pole, and the same holds for the South Pole compared to how they have to travel, the distance they have to travel at the equator. Okay, so what you're looking at here, guys, a nice little graph for you. Latitude on the x-axis, and then temperature on the y. And you can see that around the equator, so 0 to 10 degrees, you see the temperature is pretty constant. It's right around 28 degrees or so Celsius, which works out to be roughly into the high 80s, about 86 degrees or so Fahrenheit. And it's pretty steady around the equator. And then around 30 degrees latitude or so is where we begin to see a little bit of a negative trend, and we see that negative trend continuing all the way up towards the poles. Okay, so take note of where that temperature deviates from the equator temp of 28 degrees, and it's right around the 30 degree latitude mark. And obviously, one final point, you guys, this is just intuitive. Temperature is going to increase as the amount of the solar radiation increases, right? We all know that. A little bit on global circulation patterns, wind currents, and then we'll move on to aquatic biomes. What you have, guys, is high temperatures at the equator. It's going to cause the air to rise. Okay, it rises because it becomes less dense when it's heated. Same reason, like I've told you all before, why if you have a room in your house, it's maybe on the third floor, could be a spare room, or maybe you have a attic up there, it's going to be really warm in the summer. All right, we all know that hot air rises because it's less dense. So air is going to cool and fall. Take note of this term, what we call subsidence zones. And it's either going to flow towards the poles or back towards the equator. You guys can look ahead in your note packet and be up on the board in a second. We'll look at kind of these circulation patterns. Another term for you, the ITCZ. The ITCZ is called the Intertropical Convergence Zone. Okay, and that's where the equatorial flow from both hemispheres, the north and south, come together. Let's look at that right here. Check it out right here, guys. It's both shown in red. Here's the equator. Here we are looking at Africa. And you can see right here these wind patterns, okay, coming together here at this ITCZ. And the flow of those wind patterns, along with the precipitation, is what's going to determine these major biomes that we see. And you guys know these biomes, right? Deserts, jungles, grasslands or savannas, like in Africa and the documentaries that you see with, zebra and lions. And you can see around the equator is where you're going to see your tropical rainforest generally. Take note of this, guys. Your deserts almost always occur at 30 degrees north and south of the equator. And you can see that here with the large Sahara Desert here in northern Africa. A little bit about elevation, right? Something else. If you've ever climbed up a mountain, you can tell that the temperature is going to decrease, right? As you increase your elevation. Couple concepts for you guys. Adiabatic cooling. Increasing elevation leads to a decrease in air pressure. Okay, so increase in elevation, decrease in air pressure, decrease in temp are your two trends. And take note the general trend. 10 degrees Celsius drop for every 1,000 meters. 10 degrees C for every 1,000 meters that you go up, generally. Now this rain shadow concept, we don't experience that around here. But if you live near a large mountain range, you'll experience this rain shadow. What it is that warm air that's filled with moisture, okay, it's going to flow up the side of the mountains. And look at this diagram. Here's the warm air, let's say from the ocean. Okay, so here is Pacific Ocean in California, and here is the Cascade Mountain Range shown in green. Now what happens is this warm air from the ocean, full of moisture, flows into the coast, and then it meets up with this mountain range. Now when it meets up with that mountain range, that air is going to blow across what we call the windward side. The windward side is going to be the side that the wind is blowing into. Okay, so blowing from west to east would be the windward side, full of water. Now that air is going to rise, and as it cools, that water is going to fall as either rain or snow, depending on the temperature. But the interesting part about this rain shadow is you end up with these very kind of humid and climates with a lot of precipitation on the windward side. But on the other side, which we call the leeward side, there's no moisture left. So the end result is you often end up with really dry air on the other side of the mountain, and oftentimes deserts, okay, on the other side of the mountain, or really dry grasslands. So take note of those few trends there. This also happens not only in Washington State and near California out west in the U.S., but in Madagascar also. Put a little clip here from the Madagascar movies, if you've ever seen those cartoon movies. And here's a map of Madagascar. Check it out, guys. How well you can see it with the little bit of glare. But you have a flow pattern coming off of the Indian Ocean, flowing from east to west. And Madagascar is right here off the coast of Africa. And then what happens is the exact same thing. The windward side, all the rain drops on the east coast of Madagascar. On the leeward, in this case, the western side, it is going to have much more drier conditions. All right, so that's the idea of that rain shadow effect. You guys got any questions about any of these terms so far? how close is the land mass to water is going to influence its ability to keep its temperature. Land heats and cools more quickly than the large body of water. All right? Water doesn't change temperature very quickly because it has what we call a high specific heat. What that means is specific heat, that's just the amount of energy it takes to raise the temperature of water. Okay, 1 gram of water by 1 degree Celsius. What that means is it takes a lot more energy to heat up the water than it does the air. And you guys are going to notice that this time of year because the weather's going to be warming up. And if you have a swimming pool, you're probably not thinking about swimming quite yet. It's getting still pretty chilly out at night especially. But in about a month, it's going to be up into the 80s nearly every day. So you're going to want to get in that pool and you're going to feel the pool water and it's still going to feel cold. And the reason it's still going to feel cold is it's going to take a lot longer to heat up that pool water of yours than it's going to the outside air. So you're going to have to wait a little bit to get into the swimming pool unless you want to jump into a cold swimming pool. All right, guys, so that finishes up kind of all the basics of our ecosystem ecology. All right, we talked about temperature, talked about precipitation. We just kind of finished off with kind of global climate patterns. And now we're going to switch gears a little bit. And the last half of this packet is all about aquatic biomes. All right, so how is life in water distributed? 4 requirements for life. All right, aquatic ecosystems provide plenty of water, obviously, and the temperatures don't fluctuate as much. Some issues, though, light will decrease with depth, and then also you have issues with the water becoming cloudy and that influencing light levels. Your term for cloudy water or dirty water that has sediment in it is called turbid. Okay, write that one down. It's come up a few times this semester. Nutrients tend to be concentrated at the bottom in aquatic ecosystems, especially freshwater ones. So you have this inverse relationship where nutrients are the highest at the bottom of the lake, the light levels are going to be the lowest. Let's go ahead and look at the different zones here. We're going to talk about freshwater ecosystems, just like right outside of our building here, we have the Big Ohio River. And there's going to be a few different zones that we'll look at. And we'll start off with lakes first, and we'll do rivers next. We're going to look at what we call the littoral, the limnetic, and the profundal zone. And that's going to be in order from the top layers of the lake near the shore, and then progressing towards the deeper layers out towards the middle of the lake. All right, guys, the littoral zone, shallow. If you ever go fishing, you're fishing in this area most likely if you're not on a boat. You got plants, cattails, what are called bulrushes, water lilies, lots of light. They are able to root themselves, and there's plenty of nutrients from that sedimentary soil near the shore. These communities, with regards to animals and plants, tend to be the most diverse in terms of the types and numbers of animals and plants they have. You have phytoplankton and zooplankton. Phytoplankton can photosynthesize. That's your distinction there. Protists as well as bacteria. So guys, don't focus a ton on the bio here. We're more focused on the geology, and I'm just incorporating the bio. So we didn't, talk a lot about protists and things like that. All they are is single-celled little critters. If we would get a sample of pond water, put it under a microscope, odds are we'd see some protists swimming around. They're simple little unicellular animals. Zooplankton are non-photosynthetic. The limnetic zone, all right, you get photosynthesis still, all right, in your predominant animals. Plankton, okay, which is a term for this small animals that are found floating typically. And here are some examples. They often look like small shrimp. And then when you talk about the profundal zone, here, no photosynthesis. All right, so make sure you focus in on that in your note packet. Photosynthesis occurs in the littoral as well as the limnetic. However, in the profundal, no photosynthesis. So for these guys here, the organisms that live here, something like a crayfish, other bottom-dwelling animals, they're going to get nutrients from stuff that comes in and washes ashore from land or that drifts down from the surface. Here's a little diagram, guys. If you've ever been fishing at a lake, this will look familiar to you. The littoral zone, here you have your cattails. See a little turtle here sunning, warming up a little bit. Out here at the limnetic, see your big fish. And then the profundal is where you're going to see your bottom dwellers, things like crayfish, aquatic worms, and maybe some catfish at the bottom of the lake also. All right, guys, what about, so those are your general layers and lake structure. Here, a couple different types of lakes we'll talk about with regards to whether they have a lot of nutrients or few nutrients. Now, oligotrophic lakes, these ones are low in nutrients, but they are very clear. You guys would like, you see a lake like this, they look really pretty. All right, the water's really blue, you don't have any algae in it. And why that is because they're so low in nutrients, there's not a lot of life in those with regards to animals. A lot of these lakes were formed by glaciers, fed by mountain streams, and you see fish like trout and other fish that require well-oxygenated water here. There's no other organisms in there that are taking up the oxygen. So these lakes, they look really pretty, but there's really not a lot of organisms in animal and plant life typically in these oligotrophic lakes. Now look at this one. Most of the lakes that you see around here especially, they look more like this, right? You see a lot of water lilies, you see algae, you see the water, definitely not crystal clear or blue, much more of a green color to it. And that's not a bad thing. It's just there's more plant life in there, and those plants, when they die, well, they go down to the sediment, tends to make the water a little bit more turbid because you have a lot more sediment, organic material, nutrients from their surroundings, lots more plant life found in these eutrophic lakes. And the limnetic zone tends to be shallower than in your oligotrophic. Okay, so that's the basics of lakes. As you got your basic lake structure here, I'm sure you all are good with this diagram. And then I'm sure you can distinguish oligotrophic and eutrophic. And the main distinguishing characteristic is just that the oligotrophic lakes, low nutrients, much more clear water. The eutrophic lakes, large amounts of nutrients, much more plant life, water not quite as clear as in the oligotrophic lakes. And just a little bit on seas, streams, and rivers to kind of set the stage for us to finish up this packet tomorrow or Monday. Rivers are going to drain into lakes or other rivers, but the end result, they all end up in the ocean. All right, the Mississippi River flows into the Gulf of Mexico. And what you're going to see, guys, is that salt water from the ocean mixes with that incoming fresh water and creates what we call estuaries. And we can look at this diagram here. Now, this is going all the way from a mountain stream where we would have maybe an oligotrophic lake with this trout in it, right around the bottom of the mountain, possibly. A tributary. Anyone know what a tributary is? Anyone know that term? No? It's just a small stream that flows into a river. That's all a tributary is. They're small streams that flow into other rivers. Okay, we most likely, you just call them streams. But the idea with a tributary is it contributes and flows into the river. All right, then we end up with an estuary here where you have the salt water and fresh water mixing. And then last thing to finish up for today, bell's going to be ringing here in a minute or two. We're going to get into saltwater ecosystems tomorrow, so we'll finish up with a little bit more detail on the biological communities found in the ocean. Since we already covered all the geology of the ocean, we're going to cover it from a little bit of a different kind of angle here to finish up this packet on Monday. And the two major zones in the ocean are going to be the photic zone and the aphotic zone. And that's going to be levels at which light penetrates and photosynthesis occurs. And the aphotic zone, remember, anytime you put A in front of something in science, typically it means without. So aphotic means we're not going to have photosynthesis in those zones. So tomorrow when we come in, we'll pick up, talk about, or Monday when we come in, we'll come in and talk about the photic zone, levels at which it extends down to, and then the aphotic zone, which is the majority of the ocean. And then we'll discuss these different regions in this diagram. So that's it for today, guys. No assignments for the weekend. And I'll see you guys on Monday, and we'll pick up talking about the ocean. So that's it for today. Bell's going to ring here in about a minute or so.